Some books are just stories. But Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, that's something else entirely. It's not just a novel, it's a deep dive into the absolute brutality of colonialism. And man, it's a haunting look into the human soul itself. So let's get into this incredibly complex and, yeah, pretty controversial masterpiece. So the book kicks off with this incredible line. But here's the twist. The narrator, Marlowe, he's not talking about the Congo. Nope. He's looking right at the River Thames, in London. He's basically saying, hey, remember, this place, the very heart of the British Empire, was once considered a dark place by the Romans who conquered it. So right from page 1, Conrad is messing with our heads, making us ask, wait, who gets to decide what's civilized and what's dark anyway? Okay, so to really get what this novel is about, we've got to travel back in time. We're in the late 19th century, and Europe is carving up Africa. And how did they justify this? Well, they sold it as this really noble cause. And this right here, this was the sales pitch. You have King Leopold II of Belgium telling the world he was on a mission to pierce the darkness, a crusade for progress. He made it sound so philanthropic, right? He set up all these organizations to convince everyone his interest in the Congo was just about bringing science, progress, and, get this, abolishing the slave trade. It was all wrapped up in this noble, holy crusade kind of language. And Conrad has the perfect metaphor for this. He calls Brussels, the city where this whole operation was being run, a whited sepulcher. It's a biblical term for something that looks all pure and beautiful on the outside, but inside it's just full of death and decay. It's this incredible bit of foreshadowing, basically hinting that this shiny European capital is just a pretty mask for something absolutely rotten to the core. And boom, this slide just rips that mask right off. The public story? Free trade, human rights, helping people. It was a total lie. The reality? A horrific, violent grab for ivory and rubber. And it was built on a system of forced labor and terror so unbelievably brutal that it led to the deaths of, it's estimated, 10 million people. Just let that number sink in. So, let's get into the journey itself. Back in 1890, Joseph Conrad, the author, actually took a job as a steamboat captain on the Congo River. That trip, just 6 months long, completely broke him, and it became the real-life blueprint for Marlowe's fictional voyage in the book. And listen to how Conrad describes the river. It's not just a river, it's this immense snake uncoiled. The imagery here is just dripping with the sense of dread. See, the river isn't a path to some kind of enlightenment. It's a serpent, and it's luring Marlowe deeper and deeper into this primal world, pulling him away from everything he thought he knew. It's like traveling backwards in time. So what's the first thing he sees when he gets there? It's the sight of the Congolese laborers, and it just shocks him to his core. He describes these emaciated people in chains, so skinny he could see every rib, their joints like knots in a rope. They weren't even seen as people, they were ghosts, the horrifying human cost of all this so-called progress. But the horror didn't stop with just forced labor. No, Marlowe starts hearing about these unthinkable practices they used to enforce the ivory and rubber quotas. To prove that soldiers weren't wasting bullets on, say, hunting for food, Leopold's agents were often forced to bring back the severed hand of a Congolese person for every single bullet they fired. It's just monstrous. And you could see the effect of this systemic terror just by looking at the landscape. As Marlowe's boat goes deeper into the jungle, he passes one village after another, and they're all completely empty, silent. Why? Because the people had fled deep into the jungle. They chose to face wild animals and starvation rather than be enslaved or murdered by the men on a civilizing mission. And all of it led to one horrifying number: 10 million. That's the estimated number of people who died under Leopold's rule in the Congo. This wasn't just some tragedy. It was a crime on a genocidal scale, all driven by what Marlowe calls the vilest scramble for loot that ever disfigured the history of human conscience. Okay, so at the very end of this river, at the deepest, darkest point of the journey, we find one man, the almost mythical agent, Mr. Kurtz. Even before Marlowe meets him, he keeps hearing these whispers about Kurtz. This guy is a genius, they say. A painter, a poet, a musician, a man with this incredible mind and a way with words. They even say all Europe contributed to the making of Kurtz. So he's built up to be the absolute pinnacle of what civilization can produce, the best of the best. But then Marlowe finds something. It's a report Kurtz wrote, an eloquent 17-page essay on how white men should act like gods to the natives to help them. And at the very end of this beautiful, high-minded report, there's this little note scrawled in a shaky handwriting: exterminate all the brutes. In that moment, the mask doesn't just slip, it shatters into a million pieces.
And the reality of who Kurtz has become, it's a total nightmare. Out there, in the jungle, with no police, no society, no one to judge him, that thin layer of civilization just melts away. He becomes a living god to the local tribes, he presides over human sacrifices, he even decorates his home with the severed heads of people who crossed him. And you know, Kurtz was actually based on real colonial agents. In the end, he's the perfect, horrifying symbol for the whole colonial project. So eloquent and noble on the surface, but inside, completely hollow and savage.
So the climax of this whole story, it isn't some big dramatic battle. It's a whisper. It all comes down to the moment of Kurtz's death and his final, really cryptic judgment on his life, on this whole imperial project, and maybe on all of humanity. These are his last words. The horror, the horror. Just 2 words. And they've been echoing through literature for over 100 years, with everyone trying to figure out what he meant. So what on earth did he mean? That's the million-dollar question. Marlowe, our narrator, he wants to believe it was a moral victory, that in his final seconds, Kurtz finally saw the pure evil of what he'd done and judged himself for it. But there's a much darker way to read it. What if it was just a shriek of pure rage? The cry of a megalomaniac who was furious that death was stopping him before he could do more. But the story of Heart of Darkness doesn't stop when Kurtz dies, not by a long shot. Its legacy is incredibly controversial and sparks fierce debate even today. When it first came out, the book was actually part of this big international outcry. It helped fuel a campaign that eventually forced King Leopold to give up his personal control of the Congo in 1908. But then, decades later, the book's legacy was challenged in a huge way. Yeah, in 1975, the legendary Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe gave this bombshell of a lecture, and he didn't pull any punches. He basically said that despite its critique of imperialism, the novel is, at its heart, deeply racist. And his argument was that Conrad refuses to give his African characters any real humanity, or even language. He reduces the entire continent and its people to nothing more than a scary, primitive backdrop for a white guy's identity crisis. Now, the reaction to Achebe's critique has been all over the map. Some scholars totally agree, saying you just can't separate the book from its racism. But others defend it. They say, well, you have to see it as a product of its time. Or they argue that the racism really belongs to Marlowe, the narrator, and that Conrad is actually critiquing that racist mindset. And this really is the core of the whole debate. How do you weigh the book's powerful anti-colonial message against its seriously flawed racist depiction of Africa? Which leads us to the final, really uncomfortable question that this book forces us to grapple with. Can a work of art be a masterpiece and still be racist? By making us confront that paradox head-on, Heart of Darkness pretty much guarantees its place as one of the most challenging and honestly, one of the most essential books you'll ever read.